Hello and welcome to this video. In this video I am going to be talking about the movie Colonia that is based on the real life Colonia Dignidad that was in Chile, and we could talk about the socio-political issues that were going on at the time. However, why I want to mention this from the standpoint of someone who is opposed to William Branham and the message cult. What people do not know, people who do not know William Branham, do not know how much influence that he had over particular people. And the great percentage of American Christians don't know William Branham. So you have to connect this in order to see that people who are disturbed, they don't tend to follow any messages of salvation in Jesus Christ. They tend to stay within the cult of personality surrounding the person that they adore and admire. And that is what I see in the cult of William Branham, is that it is a cult of personality. Now, I am not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I have been trained to view film and to do character studies, and every good film reviewer does this, right? We do character studies of the individual characters and the character of the film itself. And so this is how I want to approach this particular issue. Okay. Paul Shafer was a follower of William Branham. And while I agree that the film Colonia did lack in impressive dialogue, as Hollywood Reporter said in their article of it, was that the dialogue was flat. And I can agree with that to a point, but Hollywood Reporter doesn't understand that Paul Shafer was repeating what William Branham taught, especially about women. And for those of you who are unaware, and clearly Paul Shafer was an extremely disturbed individual. We could say that maybe he suffered post-traumatic stress disorder, as he had been in a concentration camp. He was Jewish, and as a little boy, witnessed atrocities by the Nazis. So clearly, it is not that he was Jewish, right? I mean, to delve into those psychological issues of people that have been subjected to atrocities to that degree, it is so hard, as a normal, rational, and logical person. It is so hard to understand the depths of what can happen to people who suffer from that. Now, I'm not saying that's what Paul Shafer suffered from, post-traumatic stress disorder, but he was clearly disturbed. And yet he was just as disturbed as Jim Jones. I mean, the way that he ran the Colonia and the way that he wanted people to perceive him, uh, I mean, he was insane. Uh, Now, the film did end with saying that only 5 people escaped the cult in 40 years. And after Shafer was arrested, he he got 33 years and he died in 2010. So really he didn't suffer greatly for the atrocities that he did on other people. Uh, so it is one of those things that you uh, would look at, as a rational and you can put all kinds of psychological motives onto him. Uh, so when you think about this, think about people that are already prone to certain psychological conditions. They're already prone, and you build into them some kind of messiah complex, because he had a messiah complex. I mean, it's obvious in the dialogue that he had this issue. The same as William Branham. William Branham very much had a messiah complex, and he was narcissistic. Paul Shafer himself didn't seem to be narcissistic. Now, again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm just doing a character study. And so I have to look at all of the motives. Also, in order to understand the character that I'm viewing, right? And in film, right, you have what is known as the anti-hero. And the anti-hero is somebody who is not necessarily a good person, but he elicits an emotional response to gain sympathy for his cause. Now, I wouldn't say that Paul Shafer was an anti-hero. By no means. He did not fit that, because there was no redeeming qualities in him that would cause a person to have sympathy for him. Okay? They did not mention that he had been in a concentration camp when he was a little boy. That was not mentioned. And the movie was set up during the Allende's attempted coup of the Chilean government and Pinochet's response in arresting people. Now, Paul Shafer had full permission from Pinochet to operate this camp. So it was clearly a case of human rights violations. And at the time, even Amnesty International, even though they were trying to deal with this, they knew it was a cult. They knew that it was not only just a cult, but a violent and dangerous one. Amnesty International had their hands tied by the Pinochet government. So the question from the filmmakers really is, who bears the most responsibility for what happened at the colony? And certainly they imply that Pinochet should have been charged for human rights violations. And Shafer only got 33 years. Now, I think that because this movie is not what Hollywood is used to. Hollywood is used to salacious and gratuitous sex and violence. And this movie didn't have either. It did show violence and what these people went through. And of course, it was relatively standard fare for Hollywood, the storyline itself. But the historical background of the colony, I think, will be explored more in the future when people start discussing this film. And it was true. These things that were presented in the movie were true. Certainly not every piece of dialogue was not. Certainly not. But I felt that maybe the screenwriter felt that by keeping it as simple dialogue, that it sounds much like a very flat, one-dimensional perspective. I mean, there wasn't really anything grand said in the dialogue. But if you know what William Branham said, and his sermons are available online to read, what the man himself said, many things that Shafer said was what William Branham said before. William Branham said in sermons that women were the cause of all evil, that women were created by Satan, and that everything negative that he could think about women was what Paul Shafer repeated. And Paul Shafer, even himself, told his followers there that that God was speaking through him, which is what William Branham said. Now, cult leaders tend to do that in religious cults. They have the Messiah complex, and therefore they believe. I don't know how much depth there is in saying that. I really don't know the depths of their belief that they are God, or God is speaking through them. See, it's one of those things that these cult leaders, who are so accustomed to running frauds and scams and cons on people, how far do they go in their own psychology, and how much do they believe their own cons? Now, that is something that I can't judge that. I would like to say that was what he believed, but other people believe that. So it's one of those things that psychiatrists and psychologists and law enforcement and really deal with so much that they can't answer that question. And the one movie that really highlighted that was Primal Fear with Edward Norton and Richard Gere. That movie was about a young man convicted of murder, and when he was in his trial, he had to convince his lawyer that he was insane so that he could beat the murder rap. And so he pretended to be insane, or maybe he didn't pretend to be insane. I mean, that was the question. Now, certainly, Paul Shafer suffered from some type of insanity. Clearly. And if his influence was William Branham, you question how much insanity did William Branham exhibit. And, in well over 1,000 sermons that were transcribed, there is a thread of insanity through William Branham's sermons. But we would hesitate to define his mental illness. Clearly, he was mentally ill. It doesn't take a genius to recognize mental illness in William Branham. So then you question people who sit under William Branham's sermons. How insane are they? Yeah, that's a tough question. There are some who very clearly are disturbed who follow the message of William Branham. I don't know the motivations for these people who initially are drawn to William Branham. I don't know. Many people were born into it, and through conditioning and brainwashing and hypnosis remain in it as adults. But adults who are attracted to the message is something that I simply don't understand. And clearly the mental health professionals are dealing with that problem also. But what we see is, no matter what you say about William Branham from his sermons himself, and you say to followers of William Branham, we say, well, William Branham said this, and it contradicts what William Branham said over here. There's a mental wall that is built up that they cannot address the contradictions. And they go so far as to deny the contradictions, even though it is glaring them in the face, even though they can listen to the tapes back to back that has contradictions. They still deny the contradictions. They cannot fully comprehend that there are contradictions. And this is something that is really difficult for somebody who is from outside of the message to understand how anyone can buy into the contradictions, even though the contradictions are so glaringly opposing each other. For instance, William Branham gives 3 different locations for where his own mother was born. And I mean, obviously, if you know his life story and who he is speaking to, then you know that for this audience he was saying one thing, for another audience he said something completely different. So it depended on the audience, and without these audiences being aware of what he previously said, then they would have no way of confirming anything. And this is how he relied on his ministry, that they did not know. People, they are attracted because he claimed to have healed people. And yet, the prayer cards, they were not really useful. I mean, they were given to him. Obviously, he had the information on the prayer card that was given to him. And sometimes he even failed in that. But yet he called it discernment, and people were like, oh, he's discerning my name, he's discerning my condition. They didn't know that William Branham had already been given the information. So that's not discernment. And even in those times when he was saying what's on the prayer cards, there were people who followed him the same people following William Branham were following Jim Jones. And I would imagine also A. Allen, Oral Roberts. I would imagine. But then to understand, I mean, they're like rock and roll stars. They are celebrities. They were celebrities in those days. And typically people who were Christian, who couldn't be entertained like the rest of society. They couldn't go to movies. They couldn't watch TV. Well, TV didn't come along till really en masse until the 1950s. Really, there were TVs in the 1940s, but not the general population really didn't have access to TVs until the 1950s. And so this became big entertainment for Christians who didn't want to partake in other worldly avenues of entertainment. So they followed these preachers around from city to city, and these preachers became just like rock stars. They had full entourages with them. They had groupies, they had roadies. They had these. And so I watched some videos of A. Allen, and while his miracles, I really am not going to say whether or not A. Allen really did heal anyone or not. A. Allen also was a victim of his own excesses. He died of alcohol poisoning because he was an alcoholic. And he clearly could not submit himself to the same power of God that he was expecting people to believe when it came to he could have been healed, but he was a victim of his own excesses. And really, in comparing William Branham and A. Allen, A. Allen was self-destructive, whereas William Branham was killed in such a manner that it was you'd have to ask if it was divine intervention, because clearly William Branham was not expecting, neither was A. Allen, neither were expecting their deaths, but A. Allen was self-destructive. And the night that he died, his message was being broadcast on radio, where he was saying that he was going to be in some city. And, I think that most people who knew of the times and the popularity of A. Allen know about the ministry of A. Allen. They know this story, so they know what happened. And so many other tragic things happened to other big preachers. But when you move forward into the 70s and 80s and 90s, right? And other preachers were caught. I mean, ABC caught Kenneth Copeland, right, in what he was doing. And today, in this day, right, we have so many people who are outspoken and can expose what these celebrity preachers are doing. So we tend to keep it open. Not so much in William Branham's day. And other churches that did not want to work with William Branham anymore would, they cut him off completely. They said, no, you can't come here anymore. Your theology is bad. And he did have bad theology that even his own followers who have not been exposed to other religions don't even realize that he was teaching things that other cults had already been exposed for doing. They don't realize that he preached Jehovah's Witness doctrines. He preached Mormonism. He preached other things. He preached from the emphatic diaglot. And his followers, when you say that the emphatic diaglot was translated by Christadelphian, by the way, who was not a Greek scholar. Benjamin Wilson was not a Greek scholar, and neither was his uncle. His uncle was, in fact, just a typesetter, and published this, and did not have the firm grasp of Greek. And William Branham mentioned the emphatic diaglot 22 times. And he said, if you have your emphatic diaglot, open up to, I'm reading from the emphatic diaglot. This is what he was preaching from. And his followers are not aware that the emphatic diaglot was distributed and published by the Watchtower Society of the Jehovah's Witnesses to be read. I mean, now people know the New International Version, or, whatever it is that the Jehovah's Witnesses use. The emphatic diaglot was published and distributed by Jehovah's Witnesses for use in Jehovah's Witnesses churches. So for people to not know this and assume, because I've seen that many people in the message will assume that he's reading from the King James, and they try to argue from the King James against people who are saying that that's not what the Bible says. Well, of course not, because he's reading from the emphatic diaglot. And there are so many other references that William Branham said that were not at all in the Bible that he claimed that, or his followers believed that he was reading from. For instance, the theophany is not mentioned in the King James Bible. Neither are neophytes, which William Branham was notoriously famous for not understanding words. He did not understand the definitions of these words. So he would give a complete different definition. And when you have a person with such a mind like Paul Shafer, I mean, already the man is suffering from some sort of mental illness and is disturbed. And then this message of William Branham gets into his mind, and then he starts repeating the same things that William Branham said. Well, now, could we say that William Branham is responsible for Paul Shafer? That would be very legally tough to do. And Paul Shafer should be accountable for his own actions. But if his followers are running loose in this world, promoting the same exact teaching, then there is a huge problem there. And if they continually say that William Branham was the voice of God, or William Branham was Almighty God, I mean, the things that they say of him came from Branham himself. So people, his followers, who deny that William Branham said that, very clearly are not really paying attention to what the tapes say, and they are repeating what their preachers have said. And his preachers, their preachers continually push this idea that Branham was Jesus, that Branham was Elijah, that Branham was Michael, the archangel. And so ultimately, where does the responsibility fall? In the movie Colonia, clearly they place the blame solely on Paul Shafer, which is correct. That he should be accountable for his own crimes. But his motivation should be made known. And his motivation was William Branham. Should we hold William Branham accountable for all the insane people who believe him, who may in the future act out their belief in William Branham? I think that William Branham being exposed as a fraud will cause people to eventually question themselves. There are many cults who do things that are similar. And we would not like to see another incident like at Jonestown, which Jim Jones was affiliated with William Branham in the beginning. Yes, he was. We don't want to see another Waco. And David Koresh said that he was the Elijah Restorer, just as William Branham did, just as John Alexander Dowie did, just as Charles Taze Russell did. So who has the greater accountability, the leader or the followers? That's a very tough question. Now, we expose William Branham for being a fraud, because he was very clearly a fraud. He was a liar. You know, you would have to simply live behind that brick wall not to understand that. And we have to break the brick wall down if we do not want to see another incident like Waco, where some preacher or some leader is such a loose cannon that they act out in this way. So where do you think that we should approach that? How? Well, we have to continually expose William Branham as a fraud, because there are a lot of people in this world who follow William Branham who would act out in this manner. We've seen it with Paul Shafer. And what's to prevent any other disturbed individual from going to those links when already we know that there is sexual abuse of children in message churches that is covered up actively? This is happening. So can we, the rest of us, sit back and watch this go on as you Branhamites sit on your pews and get offended because you're going to be accountable for it? Society will make you accountable for it. So if you know what's going on and you don't report it, you will be accountable before the law. That's how it works. And if you sit back and get offended because I offend your William Branham, then understand this. William Branham offends me. So none of your temper tantrums change the fact that William Branham was a fraud. It merely means that in your temper tantrum, you don't want to have it made known to you that you're following a liar. The man died a long time ago. But the effects of William Branham can be clearly seen in men like Paul Shafer. And I dare say there's probably one of you out there right now who will go to that extreme. And I'm doing what I can to stop you. And thank you for watching.